When an avoidant loses a super empath, it may not hit them right away. At first, they feel free. They finally have room to breathe. No one asking for closeness, no one challenging their emotional distance, no one holding up a mirror to what they're really feeling. That sense of space feels like peace at first. But time has a strange way of revealing that what they thought was freedom is actually emptiness. Because when you lose someone who understood your soul without you ever having to explain it, you don't just forget that, you remember it, you replay it, and deep down, you miss it. In the beginning, the avoidant feels relief. They convince themselves they escaped pressure, the intensity, the honesty, the emotional depth that made them uncomfortable. They say to themselves, it was too much, I just need calm. But what they call calm is really just numbness, because a super empath doesn't just love, they see. They hear what you don't say. They comfort without being asked. They care with a kind of depth most people can't even understand. And when that kind of presence disappears, there's an invisible silence that no casual relationship can replace. At first, the avoidant doesn't notice. They distract themselves. They stay busy. They detach and move on. But slowly, the silence grows louder. The distractions stop working. And the memory of being loved without judgment starts to echo in their mind. That's when the regret begins. Not because they're lonely, but because they realize they were loved in a way they never knew how to accept. A super empath doesn't chase after being left. They heal, they grow, and once they understand that their love was given to someone who couldn't meet them halfway, they stop overgiving. They stop pouring into emptiness. They become a lesson the avoidant never forgets. So yes, every avoidant eventually regrets losing a super empath, not because they lost control, but because they lost the one person who made love feel safe enough to be real. When an avoidant first walks away, it feels like a breath of fresh air. It feels like they've finally come up for air after being underwater too long. The quiet feels peaceful, manageable. They tell themselves they did the right thing. They say the relationship was too heavy, too intense, too emotional. But what they don't see yet is that the pressure they felt wasn't from the empath's love. It came from their own fear of being truly seen. The super empath's depth made them confront the parts of themselves they've avoided for years. The silence after the breakup feels soothing at first, but that calm isn't healing. It's disconnection. It's not peace. It's avoidance dressed up as comfort. In those early days, the distance feels like control. No one asking about their feelings. No one noticing their contradictions. No one inviting them into emotional honesty. They retreat into what feels safe: logic, independence, self-sufficiency. It feels familiar. It feels like safety. But being emotionally isolated isn't the same as being at peace. The absence of connection isn't the same as inner calm. The avoidant mistakes the quiet for balance, but deep down something vital is missing. Over time, the stillness becomes too still. The calm starts to feel cold. The routine that once gave them comfort starts to feel empty. They find themselves reaching for their phone, realizing there's no one they can text who truly understands them. They might talk to someone new, but the connection feels shallow. Surface-level validation instead of real understanding. The memory of the empath lingers, not as a person, but as a contrast. The avoidant may not admit it, but they feel a hollowness that no solitude or casual connection can fill. Avoidants often tell themselves they function best alone, that they don't need much from others. But everyone, even the most guarded, craves to be known. That's why losing a super empath leaves such a deep mark. The empath didn't just connect on the surface. They saw the avoidance walls and loved them anyway. They offered safety without pressure, and that kind of emotional presence stays with the avoidant forever. Once someone touches the part of you that hides behind your defenses, you can't unfeel that level of closeness. You can only try to bury it, but forgetting never really works. Time passes, and that initial freedom starts to feel like emptiness. The silence that once felt peaceful becomes uncomfortable. The space that once felt liberating becomes lonely. That's when the truth sets in. The relief they felt wasn't healing. It was simply running from the kind of love that scared them because it was real. A super empath loves differently. Their love doesn't come from effort, it comes from instinct. They can sense emotions before words are spoken. They notice small changes in tone, in energy, in your eyes. For the avoidant, this is both magnetic and terrifying. On one hand, it feels amazing to be understood without having to explain yourself. On the other, it feels like exposure, like someone is softly touching the parts you've spent years trying to hide. The super empath's love isn't based on fantasy. It's grounded in awareness. They don't just see who someone pretends to be, they see who that person is, beneath the walls, beneath the silence, beneath the fear. When an avoidant meets a super empath, something rare happens. For a brief moment, they feel safe enough to open up. The empath's calm energy allows them to relax in ways they normally can't. The connection feels easy yet meaningful. The empath doesn't demand vulnerability, they inspire it. They don't chase, they hold space. And in that space, the avoidant feels something they didn't think was possible. Emotional safety. That kind of safety feels strange but powerful. It's why the avoidant is drawn to the empath, even when part of them wants to pull away, because deep down, they crave that peace the empath brings, the quiet comfort of being seen and accepted. But the very thing that draws them in is also what scares them most. Real love exposes their defenses, and for someone who's spent their life hiding behind walls, that's terrifying. So they leave, they pull away, they convince themselves it's for the best. But time always brings truth to the surface. And the truth is, once you've been loved by a super empath, nothing else compares. You can try to replace them. You can try to forget. You can stay busy, distracted, detached. But somewhere in the quiet moments, when your guard slips and your thoughts wander, you'll remember the one person who saw you completely and still chose to stay. That's the kind of love you don't lose without consequence. It changes you. It wakes up the part of you that wanted to be known. And that's why every avoidant, no matter how long it takes, eventually looks back and feels the weight of what they lost. Not just a person, but a connection that showed them what real safety felt like for the first time. Deep down, they crave that kind of understanding, even if they don't know how to hold on to it. The empath gives without trying to control. They listen not just to reply, but to truly understand. They have this rare gift, the ability to carry someone's pain without judging it, to comfort without overwhelming, and to love without trying to fix. That kind of emotional presence is rare, and the avoidant feels it, even if they can't fully admit it. The care the empath shows quietly reveals what's missing in the avoidant's inner world. Warmth, safety, and emotional closeness. For someone used to distance and self-reliance, that kind of openness can feel too much. It feels too real, too close, almost dangerous. The very thing they've always longed for starts to feel like a threat because it asks for truth instead of performance. But when the avoidant finally walks away, that's when the realization begins to grow. They start to notice how rare that kind of energy really was. Other people might be kind, charming, or even affectionate, but it's not the same. The conversations feel lighter, but emptier too. The emotional exchanges feel surface level, missing the deep resonance that the empath offered so effortlessly. It's not about romantic excitement, it's about emotional depth. The super empath connects from the heart, and once that connection is gone, everything else feels flat, like living in a world without color. The avoidant might try to convince themselves they prefer it this way, easy, simple, detached, but at some point they remember what it felt like to be seen without having to hide. They remember what it was like to be understood without words, to be accepted without needing to explain. That kind of bond doesn't fade away. It leaves an imprint on the heart, And once you've experienced that level of depth, no amount of distance can make you forget what it felt like. When the distractions fade and the noise around them settles, the avoidant begins to feel something stirring quietly. At first, they can't tell what's missing. They go about their routine, work, friends, new people, anything to fill the time. And for a while it seems to work. They tell themselves they've moved on, that they're lighter now without that emotional intensity. But truth has a way of catching up. The stillness that once felt peaceful begins to feel empty, like walking into a familiar room and realizing something precious is gone. It's not loud or dramatic, it's subtle, a quiet ache that lingers in the background. It shows up in small, random moments when they least expect it. The avoidant begins to notice small shifts within themselves. The little things that never used to bother them now feel dull. Conversations that once filled the space now feel repetitive. New relationships feel safer because they're easier, but also more lifeless. There's no spark, no challenge, no sense of being truly known. Slowly, it becomes clear. The empath brought something no one else could, a level of emotional depth that made everything feel more alive. It's not that the empath completed them, it's that the empath reflected back the parts they'd buried too deep to see. Without that mirror, the avoidant feels lost within their own walls. As the quiet deepens, memories start to surface, not of grand gestures, but of the small, meaningful moments. The way the empath listened patiently without interrupting. The way they noticed the details others missed. The warmth in their voice, the soft kindness that never came with demands. Back then, the avoidant might have brushed those moments off as intensity or emotional neediness, but now they see it for what it truly was, real care. The kind that doesn't manipulate, doesn't fade, and doesn't ask for anything in return. These realizations bring a slow and steady sense of regret. It's not sharp at first, but it grows, quiet and undeniable. The avoidant might try to fill the emptiness again. New faces, new routines, new distractions, but something always feels slightly off. They can't recreate the emotional safety they once resisted. Even if they don't say it out loud, they start to feel the loss deep down. Not just the loss of a person, but the loss of connection, the kind that made them feel seen in a world where they've always felt unseen. The silence that once gave them comfort now exposes everything they've tried to hide. In time, they begin to realize that the quiet they used to crave isn't peace at all, it's absence. The absence of laughter that felt natural, the absence of warmth that softened their guarded heart, the absence of being known by someone who didn't need explanations. And with that realization comes a deeper truth. Losing a super empath wasn't just losing someone else. It was losing access to a version of themselves that only love could bring forward. When the energy shifts and the super empath finally pulls back, everything starts to change. The avoidant, who once thought they were in control, begins to feel the ground tilt beneath them. The empath, after carrying the emotional load for so long, reaches a breaking point, not of anger, but of understanding. They stop chasing to be understood and start understanding themselves. They realize that love cannot fill a space where someone refuses to meet them halfway. This awakening isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet, steady, and powerful. It's the moment the empath decides to stop proving their worth to someone who couldn't recognize it. That silent act of stepping away becomes the turning point, not only for the empath's healing, but also for the avoidant's awakening. At first, it confuses the avoidant. They were so used to the empath being the one who held things together, the one who reached out, soothed, and bridged the distance. When that steady energy disappears, they assume it's temporary. They believe the empath will return, will check in, will miss them enough to start again. But this time it doesn't happen. There's only silence, no messages, no small check-ins, no gentle reassurance, just absence. And in that silence, something powerful begins to happen. The avoidant starts to feel the weight of everything they pushed away, the love they didn't know how to receive, the safety they mistook for pressure, the closeness they thought they didn't need. They begin to see that the connection they lost wasn't ordinary. It was rare. It was the kind that changes you, even if you didn't know it while it was happening. And by the time they understand that, the empath has already moved forward, not in anger but in peace, finally realizing that real love doesn't chase what refuses to grow with it. For the first time, the avoidant feels what it's like to stand on the other side of emotional distance, to reach out with their energy and find nothing waiting for them. This is where regret begins to grow quietly inside them. They start to see that the empath's love wasn't just soft and comforting, it was grounding. The relationship might have felt intense, but that intensity didn't come from drama. It came from the empath's emotional depth. They start to miss the steady calm the empath once brought into their life. The very things that used to make them uneasy, honesty, openness, and compassion, now become the things they crave the most. It's ironic, but it's deeply human. People often realize the true value of emotional safety only after it's gone. Meanwhile, the empath isn't bitter or broken. They're evolving. They've stopped waiting for someone to meet them where they are, and instead, they've started to create that peace within themselves. Their energy changes. It shifts from trying to prove their love to protecting it. They stop giving endlessly to someone who doesn't know how to give back. This new energy isn't a punishment toward the avoidant, it's growth. And that growth becomes a mirror the avoidant can't ignore. The person who once seemed endlessly available now feels unreachable. Not because they're angry, but because they've outgrown the need to chase small crumbs of affection. For the avoidant, this becomes the ultimate shift in power. What they once controlled with detachment now controls them through absence. They watch the empath moving forward, glowing differently, calm, confident, and grounded in self-respect. That image lingers. They start to realize that the love they once held at arm's length is now completely out of reach, and in that silence, something hits them. Losing the empath wasn't just losing love, it was losing the one person who ever made emotional closeness feel safe enough to try. Every avoidant who loses a super empath is left with a lesson they can't unlearn. At first, they might not even recognize it as a lesson. It just feels like discomfort, restlessness, or a sense of something unfinished. But with time, that feeling takes shape. It becomes the quiet awareness that they were once loved in a rare way, deeply, selflessly, and without conditions. The super empath's love had no hidden motive. It wasn't about control or needing validation. It was about true connection, emotional presence, and honesty. When that love disappears, the avoidant eventually understands they didn't just lose a relationship. They lost a chance to grow, to heal, and to experience closeness in its purest form. That realization unfolds slowly. The avoidant begins to see that love isn't something to fear or avoid. It's not supposed to feel like suffocation. It's supposed to bring calm, understanding, and warmth. The super empath taught them that truth, not through words, but through actions. Even when things were painful, the empath responded with compassion instead of anger. They offered grace where others might have walked away. That consistency planted a small seed inside the avoidant, a memory of what love feels like when it's safe and steady. But for someone who once saw vulnerability as danger, that lesson only makes sense much later. As time passes and the avoidant meets new people, they notice something missing. Other connections may seem nice on the surface, but they lack the emotional depth that the empath carried so naturally. The avoidant catches themselves remembering moments, times when they felt seen without saying a word, or comforted without having to ask. Those memories don't come back to haunt them, but to remind them of what real connection feels like. That becomes their greatest lesson, that surface-level affection might be easier, but it will will never truly satisfy. Eventually they begin to understand the real cost of avoidance. Every time they pulled away, they thought they were protecting themselves, but in truth they were only protecting their fear. The distance they used to value becomes the very thing that kept them from what they wanted most. The super empath becomes their quiet benchmark, not an idolized figure, but the memory of emotional safety. That kind of connection doesn't fade because it changes something inside you. It raises your standard. It shows you what love should feel like, not just what it should look like. The avoidant may never admit it out loud, but the regret stays. It's not loud or desperate, it's quiet and reflective. They realize that losing the super empath wasn't just losing another person's love. It was losing the chance to meet themselves within that love. Because once someone shows you what real intimacy feels like, pretending you're